It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. Welcome to my listeners here on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. And if you'd like to listen to prior podcasts of the show, read my biweekly columns on Penn Live or the Western Journal or American Thinker, or take a look at some great merchandise we have, you can check out our website at themarkscaringishow.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the Mark Scaringi Show on YouTube to follow the podcasts and comment on those publications. Or you can follow me on Twitter at Mark Scaringi. Send me a tweet, send me a comment, and we'll communicate about how we can put America first again via social media. Well, there's much going on today in the political world and around the country today. There are a variety of issues to talk about. Regrettably, we won't be able to take calls today. I'm speaking to you from the sand and the waves of lovely Cape May, New Jersey, and the phone lines have a hard time getting through the thick beach air. Yes, even the Mark Scaringi Show can take a brief vacation every now and again. And we won't be doing any Facebook Live production today, so you won't get a chance to see me sitting there on the beach in my bathing suit, which is becoming less and less of an appealing sight with each passing year. So you'll just have to sit back in your easy chair, office chair, or driver's seat and listen. And you're always welcome to post your thoughts and comments on the Mark Scaringi Show Facebook page. Well, let's get right to it. As always, we'd like to start off with something our dear Commander-in-Chief, President Donald J. Trump, has said or done that usually generates a lot of interest among the good people of central Pennsylvania and beyond, for that matter. But I'd like to draw your attention to the president's timely and humorous tweet about our dear friend over at CNN, Chris Cuomo. Chris Cuomo has been in the news quite a bit over the past couple of days. He likes to refer to himself as an esteemed journalist over at CNN, but really he just spends his days gossiping, lecturing, and hectoring as the host of Cuomo Primetime, a television, quote, news, end quote, show on CNN. And Chris can thank his family name for getting him that lucrative gig that has turned him into a national celebrity. But Chris Cuomo gets a little touchy about certain references to La Familia. Chris was spending some downtime apparently at the exclusive enclave of Shelter Island on Long Island. He was attending some sort of outdoor party, outdoor bar, where apparently there was a crowd of people and some loud music. And some locals, including a rather thick-necked, large young man, he looked like he could have been Luca Brasi's son, was feeling his oats a little bit and apparently called Chris Cuomo Fredo. Perhaps it could have been a setup. There are reports that the man, or one of the men in the group, asked Fredo, that's Chris Cuomo, for a photograph and said he thought his name was Fredo because he listened to Rush Limbaugh, and I guess Rush calls Chris Cuomo Fredo. I didn't know that, Art. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
Well, you're an avid listener of Rush Limbaugh. During the day when Rush is on, I'm over at the law office working, trying to do my job over there, so I rarely get the opportunity to listen to Rush. So this whole thing escaped my attention, but apparently Rush calls our friend over at CNN, Chris Cuomo, Fredo. Well, in any event, back at Shelter Island in this outdoor bar scene, a video starts, and the video is all over Google and Facebook, so you can check it out yourself. It starts with Chris Cuomo getting into this young man's face, berating him, calling him vulgar names, and taunting him, telling him how he's going to throw him down a flight of stairs, among others. The guy's response was classic, and he says this throughout the very heated exchange with CNN's Chris Cuomo. This large, thick-necked young man kept saying, well, I thought your name was Fredo. Now, that's a great response, and you got to give credit to this young man. He does not lose his cool at all. He's very straight, doesn't get hysterical, doesn't raise the level of his voice, doesn't make any threats of any kind toward Chris Cuomo. But when Chris Cuomo threatens to assault the guy very, very methodically says, okay, and took off his glasses and was ready, willing, and able to receive the assault and perhaps to defend himself a bit from Chris Cuomo's direct threat to assault this man. Then Chris Cuomo, he changes tactics and he tells the guy, you throw a punch. Now, wait a second. Cuomo told the guy that he would throw him down the stairs. But when the guy said, okay, please do, he actually said, please do. He took off his glasses. So now it's Chris Cuomo's turn. It's his opportunity to facilitate and carry out the threat to throw the very large man down a flight of steps. Now, I didn't see any stairs or staircases on this island. It looked pretty flat to me, so I'm not sure where the staircase comes in. Maybe that's a particular scene of The Godfather that I missed. But Cuomo's there. He's in this large man's face, and he's threatening the man, and he's saying, I'm going to throw you down the stairs. The guy said, okay, please do. And then Cuomo changes tactics and says, no, you throw the punch. Now, wait a second. That's not how this is supposed to work, right? Cuomo apparently pulls a Fredo and gets scared, gets a little weak in the knees, like Fredo did, and opts out. It turns out Fredo was a no-go. He couldn't do it. He couldn't pull the trigger. Fredo had that same problem in The Godfather. Now, do you think Michael, or what about Sonny? Do you think Sonny would have backed down from this young man? Had that been Michael or Sonny instead of Fredo Cuomo, that young man would be sleeping with the fishes tonight. So Cuomo, thankfully, is saved from further embarrassment when his friends step in between the men and essentially save Cuomo from himself. And hats off to the young, thick-necked, large man from Long Island for standing his ground and proving Chris Cuomo to be the ultimate Fredo. Now, Chris Cuomo is the younger brother of Governor Andrew Cuomo. They're both the sons of the former governor, Mario Cuomo. And he's heard in the video lecturing this young man that being called Fredo, as in Fredo Corleone, the incompetent son of the mafia don Vito Corleone in The Godfather, is the N-word for Italians. Now, there's been a lot of debate over whether being called Fredo is in fact an ethnic slur or a racist word. That debate has spread like wildfire throughout the media, and all of the important talking heads in Washington and New York, well, they're talking about it at this very time, as if this is the most important thing confronting the great republic here, the United States of America. Is Fredo a racist term? Is it an ethnic slur? Now, I, for one, being of Italian descent on my father's side, I grew up in Pittsburgh, where we have Western Pennsylvania's version of Long Island Italians. And I grew up with these young men, and many of my cousins and second cousins and third cousins are part of a group of descendants of Italian Americans in the greater Pittsburgh area. And I went to school, of course, with non-Italian Americans in the public schools and in private school. And I remember on occasion being called Dago or Wop from time to time by my non-Italian friends, but it was always in some silly attempt of a joke. But for the life of me, I don't recall ever being called Fredo, nor do I recall ever hearing anyone call one of my Italian friends or cousins Fredo. Now, maybe I'm not the best example with my red hair and fair skin. I don't exactly look like Al Pacino, more like, as a hostess in a New York eatery once mistook me for, Philip Seymour Hoffman, the famous actor who regrettably died of a heroin overdose. So it's not the most flattering comparison. He was a rather portly, pasty man. But in any event, that's who I get mistaken for. So perhaps I'm not the best example of whether or not the term Fredo is a racist or ethnic slur against Italians. I don't get it. I don't get it that calling an Italian American Fredo is somehow a racial epithet. But Chris Cuomo certainly believes that to be the case. And he was lecturing these young men about that very thing. We'll talk more about the Chris Cuomo Fredo incident when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And I'm not so sure we're carrying out our stated purpose and credo with our commentary today about Chris Cuomo and whether or not he is the Fredo of Long Island. But I will tie it into an important political and legal issue of the day in a little bit. I just want to have a little bit of fun since it is the weekend. We are on vacation, and I'm speaking to you today from the lovely beaches of Cape May, New Jersey. And so, regrettably, you're not going to be able to call in today because we can't get those phone lines through that heavy beach air. But rest assured, the Mark Scaringi Show is having a lovely time down here. It's hot and it's sunny. And we're enjoying ourselves. And yes, we are allowed to take a very brief vacation, just a couple of days from time to time, but I'll be back in studio next week. Also on vacation is Chris Cuomo, the younger brother of the governor of New York and the youngest son of the former governor of New York. And he apparently got into a little bit of a fracas, as they say, or in Italian, we would call it a malafaguta, which will require a little bit of a definition and interpretation. Maybe we'll do that a little bit later. But Chris Cuomo is at an exclusive enclave there on vacation. Of course, he is a very wealthy, well-paid talking head on CNN. He is referred to as a journalist, but I don't really see him with the old pencil and notepad going into the towns and communities and the cities across the country to gather and report the news. I just turn on my TV, and there he is sitting there looking lovely and beautiful. He's in great shape, wearing beautiful suits, and he's just kind of pontificating about the news of the day, mainly about Donald Trump and the Trump administration, and he's really just kind of giving us his opinion of the news, and that's what passes for news these days at CNN. But nevertheless, he's well ensconced, and he is a national celebrity, enjoying his day off at Shelter Island there on Long Island in New York. And he comes across a couple of young men. It may have been a little bit of a setup. We're not quite sure. I guess we'll find out in the coming days. But one of the young men, I guess, wanted to take a photograph with Mr. Cuomo. He is a celebrity, of course, and apparently he called him, "Hey, Fredo, can I get a photo?" And Chris Cuomo was not happy with that. And we're talking, and then we have this video of Chris Cuomo launching into this heated and angry tirade where he really lost his cool. And I'm so shocked and surprised by that because he's always lecturing Donald Trump and Trump supporters that we're all deranged and wild-eyed and aggressive, and we confront people and we fight people. But boy, you really got the sense that that's Chris Cuomo in a nutshell, isn't it? Perhaps he was projecting just a bit. But the young man who, you got to watch the video, and I think Art's going to play the video for us. It'll be audio to you in a minute or two. But kind of a big young man with one of the largest necks I've seen. So Chris Cuomo launches a tirade into this guy and threatens to throw him down the stairs. But then when the guy says, well, yes, please do that, throw me down the stairs, Fredo opts out and does a Fredo and can't carry it out. And we were kind of laughing a little bit at if that were Michael Michael would have ordered the hit. If that were Sonny, Sonny would have taken care of that himself. And for those Godfather fans, I'm sure you know exactly what I mean. But nevertheless, Chris Cuomo, I guess he didn't have it in him to carry out his threat. So Chris Cuomo will get an F for manliness. Hectoring is not manly. Threatening to throw a man down the stairs and then declining when he says, please do, that's just not manly. But Cuomo gets an A for cultural appropriation by being the wealthy, privileged, pampered younger brother and son of governors of the state of New York, but acting like he's been subjected to some heinous racist epithets, the kind of which have been hurled at our black American friends for hundreds of years by slave masters, slave traders, segregationist U.S. Senator friends of Joe Biden, and others. That is a horrible term, the N-word. It's an ugly, ugly term, and it should be banned from our lexicon. It is undoubtedly intertwined with the terrible racism that has afflicted our country for many, many years. But for Chris Cuomo, this wealthy elite of privilege, of white privilege, if you will, to equate the N-word with Fredo is just preposterous. It's just nuts. And so Chris Cuomo gets an A for appropriating and taking on the victimhood of individuals who are actually real victims of racial epithets. But that's our young Chris Cuomo. And by the way, during the video, Chris Cuomo several times says to the young man that he's an Italian. And for the record, Chris, you're not an Italian. You're an American. And there's a big difference. But it is remarkable that even our wealthy elites who say there are no borders, there are no nation states, we're all one people united under one world or one world government, as soon as there's any heat, any aggravation, any disturbance, boom, Chris Cuomo's Italian. He goes right into ethnicity, race, tribe. And that's what our liberal friends are really, when it boils down to it, that's what they're all about, and you heard that from Chris Cuomo. And for the record, Chris Cuomo has referred to himself as Fredo on a news or on a television interview. He referred to himself as Fredo. And on his own television news show, he's permitted guests to call Donald Trump Jr. Fredo. And Donald Trump Jr. sent out a great tweet in response to Cuomo claiming Fredo is the N-word for Italian Americans. Trump Jr. wrote, "Hey, at Chris Cuomo, take it from me. Fredo isn't the N-word for Italians. It just means you're the dumb brother." And right on point, Donald Trump Jr. Now, our friend Chris Cuomo, after having been emasculated by the young man from Long Island, did later issue an apology. And we're going to get into that apology in a second. But first, we're going to ask Art to play the audio of this exchange. So my listeners here at the Mark Scaringi Show, you can hear the authentic audio version, and then you be the judge of whether or not Chris Cuomo is right to be so offended by the term Fredo. Let's hear it.
I thought that's who you were.
No, punk-ass bitches from the right call me Fredo. My name is Chris Cuomo. I'm an anchor on CNN.
You're much...
Fredo is from The Godfather. He was that weak brother.
Isn't that your
And
brother?
they use it as an Italian aspersion. Any of you Italian? Are you Italian? It's a f***ing insult to your people. It's an insult to your f***ing people. It's like the N-word for us. Wow. Is that a cool f***ing thing?
You're a much more reasonable guy in person than you seem to be on television.
That is a great comment.
Play, we'll play. If you've got something you want to say about what I do on television, then say it. But don't perform me.
Hey, listen.
What?
I don't want any problems.
Yeah, you're going to have a big f***ing problem.
What's the problem?
It's a little different on TV. Don't f***ing insult me like that.
I didn't insult you.
You call me Fredo. It's like I call you punk. You like that? You want that to be your nickname?
I didn't call you that.
You called me Fredo. You know my name's not f***ing Fredo.
I thought your name was.
You did not think my name was f***ing Fredo. Don't be a liar. You want to be a man, stand up like a man.
I'm standing up, man.
You want to be a man, I'm here. Then f***ing own it. Then own what you said.
Hey.
Then own what you said.
Listen, man, I don't have a problem with you, man.
Yeah, you're going to have a problem.
What? What are you going to do about it?
I'll ruin your I'll fucking throw you down these stairs like a punk. Please do. Why, so you can fucking sue? So you can fucking sue?
Well, why don't you do
Go
it?
take a swing. You want to call me Fredo? Take a fucking swing. Take a swing. Watch your hands. Take a swing. Watch your hands. Take a swing. No, come on, boy. Come on, boy. So you want to call me? Call me. Hey, listen, man. I'm not doing anything. I'll your I'll wreck your You didn't know what you were doing when you thought it was your name, man.
I thought it was your name.
You didn't know, right? Hey, you didn't know what you were saying, right? I thought it was his name.
I'm breaking it up. This is my body. Hey, look at all these cameras. You're in for it. You're in for it.
I'm in for what?
You're in for it.
Fredo?
You're in for it.
You call me Fredo?
Wow, that was a little scary. Stay away from Shelter Island, Art. You never know what's going to happen there.
A few beeps needed in there.
Woo, the vulgarity from our Chris Cuomo, who presents himself as a stature of morality, propriety, and decency, and lambastes President Trump when President Trump every once in a while will use a little off-color words in his remarks. But boy, that was Chris Cuomo really talking tough. Did you notice he broke into a little bit of an Italian Long Island accent there? When he was being tough, he went back to that Italian ethnicity and talked tough to this guy. But the best thing, this guy, as I was saying earlier, the guy's brilliant. The guy was just so straight and so calm. And the guy said, you're much more reasonable in person than you are on TV, which, of course, is the reverse because he was just hysterical in person. So it's great stuff. And I guess we shouldn't be spending so much time on this. It is rather silly when you break it down. We're getting the signal from Art that we're going to have to take a brief commercial break. We'll talk a little bit more about this, and then we'll transition into some more serious issues after we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And boy, there's nothing more important than that altercation that occurred on Shelter Island just a couple of days ago involving Chris Cuomo and a rather thick-necked young man who is also of Italian descent. And it was quite an exchange, and Art just played the audio for us, and most of it was kind of bleeped out. But certainly Chris Cuomo was rather upset at being called Fredo. And, we've talked about how it's when Chris Cuomo equates Fredo with the N-word, it's completely wrong and unjustified. But that's in Chris's mind, and he's a talking head and a host on CNN's Prime Time with Chris Cuomo. But he'll have to defend and explain his attempt to equate the two. We don't see that there's any sort of equation between them. And we're having a little bit of fun giving the response from Donald Trump Jr. saying Fredo isn't the N-word for Italians. It just means you're a dumb brother. And I guess I'm sure Chris didn't like that. But then, of course, the best is Donald Trump himself, the President of the United States. Right now, while we have protests and some sort of revolt going on in Hong Kong against Chinese rule, we have the North Korean dictator launching short-range missiles. We have all kinds of reports threatening a recession is ahead. But our president, love the guy, is taking on the issue of Chris Cuomo and whether or not he's Fredo, and whether or not Fredo is the N-word. And the president himself jumps in and sends a couple of tweets. He says, first, the president plays along, and he tweets, I thought Chris was Fredo. So there's the president backing up these guys on Long Island, and then tweeting that the truth hurts, totally lost it, low ratings about Chris's show on CNN, which is true. It gets very low ratings. And the president sent another tweet, and here's where I wanted to get a little bit more on topic to what we usually discuss, political and legal issues of importance to you. In the president's other tweet, he ties Chris Cuomo's hysterical outrage into the red flag issue. The president tweeted, would Chris Cuomo be given a red flag for his recent rant, filthy language, and a total loss of control. He shouldn't be allowed to have any weapon. He's nuts. That's the tweet from the President of the United States. And, here our dear President, I must offer, is perhaps a little bit lost in the irony of his own tweet. It's the President who's proposing red flag laws, and here the President himself reveals the danger of red flag laws. A law enforcement officer, a county mental health officer, or some other approved party. And as we've discussed about this on the show last week and in my columns, the approved party can be an ex-girlfriend, an ex-wife, or a mother-in-law. If they were watching that video of Chris Cuomo, and I don't know if I think he is married and has children, but maybe he has an ex-wife, or at least he's got some ex-girlfriends, and certainly he has a mother-in-law. Maybe they were a little concerned about his hysterical and aggressive and threatening behavior. I mean, Chris Cuomo threatened to throw that man down the stairs. And again, we didn't see any stairs there on the island. Nevertheless, that's very concerning. And maybe an ex-girlfriend or a mother-in-law or even a law enforcement officer viewing that video, and you heard the audio here, he sounded very irate and aggressive and very threatening. Maybe they would have gone into court right an hour or two after that video and gotten an extreme risk protection order against our young Chris Cuomo, which would have dispossessed Chris Cuomo of his firearms. And that's what President Trump is saying. Trump is saying, red flag him. He shouldn't have his guns. And he's doing that. The president's obviously doing that in jest. But if these red flag laws are passed here in Pennsylvania, they've been passed in some of our surrounding states. And in fact, there is a red flag law in New York. So we'll have to actually take a look at that, and maybe we'll give ourselves a little research project over the remainder of the vacation here, and we'll look at the New York red flag law, and maybe we'll make out a case that Chris Cuomo should be red flagged. And maybe we'll go into court in New York and we'll file a petition. Well, I wouldn't be an approved person. We'd have to find an approved person who could do that. And of course, I'm jesting a little bit here, but the point I'm making is this is a prime example of how these red flag laws could be abused. And in the law that's being proposed in Pennsylvania, there is no advance notice requirement for the initial interim temporary extreme risk protection order. If a court determines that the situation is serious enough, he can issue that interim extreme risk protection order on an ex parte basis, meaning you don't know about it, you're not there, you're not at the hearing, you're not presenting your case, you're not presenting your side of the story. Boom, that order gets issued, and all of a sudden law enforcement shows up at your home or office, or maybe in Chris's case, they'd show up at his studio at CNN, and they would take his guns off him, go to his home and order him to relinquish his guns. You see how this can be abused. And here we have the president. We love our president. He's great on so many issues. But in the wake of these horrible and heinous mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, the president, like any politician, is looking for an answer to the question. The American people are distraught and very concerned and worried about these mass shootings, as they are right to be. And they're looking for answers, and the media is just echoing each other, suggesting, implying, assuming, saying, presuming the answer is more gun control. So the media sets the debate. It sets the parameters of what can be discussed as a potential solution to the problem. That's the power of the media. Boy, if I had to do it all over again, let me tell you this, Art. If I had to do it all over again, I would have gotten into the media very early in my career. And I would have figured out how to run a media company, and I would have founded, formed, and started my own media company, and I would have built that up over the years. The media has just tremendous pressure power, I'm sorry, not pressure, I'm sounding a little like Joe Biden, power over what we say and how we think. And so so there's a mass shooting. The entire country is now focused on universal background checks and red flag laws. Meanwhile, you listen to an interview from our own United States Senator Pat Toomey. He has the big universal background check in the United States Senate, along with West Virginia's Joe Manchin. And Toomey's asked, would your universal background check have prevented the shootings in El Paso and Dayton? And the answer is no. The answer is no. So I'm proposing a solution to a problem that's not a solution. It doesn't work to fix the problem, but I need your support. We've got to have this if we want to prevent the next mass shooting. It's illogical at its premise. But that's all we can talk about. All because the media, they set the narrative for what we can discuss as the solution to the problem. And I don't want to belabor the issue on red flag laws. And we've talked a lot about it. You're probably getting tired of hearing me talk about red flag laws. I've written my most recent columns in Penn Live and the Western Journal and American Thinker on red flag laws, and you can check out those websites or the markscarenghishow.com website if you want to take a look at those columns and dig a little bit deeper into this issue. But politicians will always look for what they think is a quick and easy fix to a problem. The media hounds them. Their political opponents hound them to do something. And so they get desperate to do something. And most often, they end up doing the wrong thing. Red flag laws will not make us safer. They'll just take away guns from people the government deems to be a future risk. Here, the government can see into the future. A judge, a trial court judge, sitting in Dauphin County, Cumberland County, Perry County, they're all very wise and astute. My God, please, let me get that on the record. They are extremely wise, very smart, very knowledgeable, particularly the judges who are presiding over my law firm's cases as we speak. However, they are not God. They are not infallible. And they are the ones who are going to be given the power to look into the future. They're going to read a petition that's written by a law enforcement officer, maybe a county mental health officer, maybe an ex-wife, maybe an ex-girlfriend, maybe a mother-in-law. They're going to read that petition. It's going to be full of all of hearsay, and there's not going to be a response from the gun owner, and they're going to enter an order. And they're going to say, I think this guy in the future is going to cause extreme harm, so I'm going to take away his guns. That's not the way the American justice system is supposed to work. We'll talk more about this when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And boy, we spent most of the show on the Chris Cuomo incident. I wasn't intending to do that, but it's been a lot of fun going through the blow-by-blow or the play-by-play, if you will. And then Art played that lovely audio of Chris Cuomo's lovely, beautiful language that he spoke to this man who just said, hey, Fredo, can I get a photo? And it went rapidly downhill from there. And then we got into talking about the red flag laws again. And Art has just pulled from our law library that we have here at the WHP 580 studios, and he found the New York red flag law, which Governor Cuomo, the older brother, I guess Andrew Cuomo's the Michael, and Chris Cuomo regrettably is the Fredo. But nevertheless, Governor Cuomo, Chris's brother, did sign a red flag bill into law, and there was a press conference that he gave back in February. So the President of the United States has viewed the video. He's determined that Chris Cuomo should be red flagged. You've heard the audio here today on the Mark Scaringi Show. Not necessarily an exclusive. You may have heard it somewhere else. But you be the judge, because this is what judges are going to have to do now in New York and probably in Pennsylvania, because Governor Wolf is He's hell-bent to get that red flag law passed. He wants to look like he's doing something, and certainly with this shooting now in Philadelphia, which I wanted to talk about, but we're getting a little short on time. But you had that horrible shooting just yesterday in Philadelphia. 6 police officers shot, wounded. Thankfully, none of them died. In an hours-long standoff, a hostage crisis. It's just the worst of the worst. Marcus Hill, the suspect, of course, is a repeat felon. And the law prohibits that shooter from possessing firearms. He's prohibited under federal law. He's prohibited under state law from possessing firearms. So had he gone to a gun show or a gun shop or any federal firearms licensee to purchase a firearm, he would have been denied. He would have flunked the background check. That's another one of these gun control laws. We talked briefly about Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin's bill, the universal background check. That would expand the universal check system to include private sales. All right, so do you think Marcus Hill, this repeat violent felon, the kind of guy who will shoot and try to kill 6 police officers, do you think that he would have subjected himself to a background check in order to acquire the small arsenal of firearms that he had? No. Good God. He got those firearms on the black market, the same market that he deals in as a drug dealer. I mean, this is just mind-boggling to me. Do you foresee Marcus Hill walking up to the local Field and Stream and filling out ATF Form 4473, checking the boxes? Oh, yeah, actually, I am an ex-con, a couple of murders, a couple of ag assaults, but here, let me get this AK-47. No, that's not the way it works. So we have gun control laws on the books. We have a criminal background check system in place that does cover Philadelphia. I know the Philadelphia Inquirer and the New York Times today, particularly the New York Times, are talking about the problem with the shooting in Philadelphia is the lack of gun control in Pennsylvania compared to its neighboring states. The New York Times also pointed out that the county and city of Philadelphia, which strangely Philadelphia is both a county and a city, it does not have the legal right to enact its own gun control laws. That's a matter of Pennsylvania state law. And so, of course, the New York Times is decrying the inability of Philadelphia to legislate essentially its own separate gun control laws for Philadelphia. But Philadelphia is still part of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and it was still unlawful for Marcus Hill to have acquired possession of any of those firearms. It violates federal and state law. And, of course, it's unlawful for Marcus Hill to try to kill a police officer. That is also unlawful, yet he tried to do that as well. There was no background check system that stopped him from doing that. And Marcus Hill spent a lot of years in prison. That's the ultimate red flag. I mean, the red flag laws don't put you in jail. They just take away your guns. This man spent years in prison. He got the biggest red flag you can get. Yet there's an end to to almost every prison sentence. And Marcus Hill got out, a repeat violent felon, left to live in Nicetown, the Nicetown section of Philadelphia, which apparently is not all that nice after all. Yet, it's a terrible tragedy that befell the good people of Philadelphia. They have to live with this maniac in their neighborhood, and a horrible tragedy that police officers are trying to execute a lawful warrant because Marcus Hill is a drug dealer, allegedly, of course, allegedly a drug dealer. They've got to execute the warrant. They're doing their jobs. They're carrying out the law, and they walk into a siege, and hostages are taken, and it's a terrible ordeal follows. But ultimately, Marcus Hill came out and surrendered himself. But interestingly, he was carrying one last firearm when he surrendered. So one last failure of gun control. He wasn't allowed to have that firearm by federal and state law. Now, So, what does the mayor of Philadelphia say in response to this horrible tragedy that occurred? Now, you have a repeat violent felon let out of jail onto the streets of Philadelphia, resides in a drug den in Nicetown section of Philadelphia, continues all of this allegedly, continues his trade. He's a drug dealer. That's what he does. He buys and sells illegal drugs, gets the kids in the community hooked on all kinds of horrible drugs, destroys their bodies, destroys their lives, etc., etc. This is this man's business. And he tries to kill 6 police officers. Thankfully fails. What does Mayor Jim Kinney of Philadelphia say in response to this? Now, by the way, the mayor's job is to control crime. The mayor is actually the titular or the nominal head of the police department. The mayor is in charge of the police department. The police department is supposed to keep the streets safe. They're supposed to control crime. How did the mayor do? I think the answer is terrible. You have an armed killer here on the loose in Philadelphia. So this is a failure of Mayor Jim Kinney to keep Nicetown, Philadelphia safe. So it's his failure. But what does Mayor Kinney say? Well, he declares our officers need help. They need help with gun control. They don't deserve to be shot at with an unlimited supply of weapons and unlimited supply of bullets. That's Kinney's statement. Our officers need help. They need help with gun control. How about help? How about help by through judges and prosecutors putting an armed convicted felon behind bars for a long, long time? And how about parole agents and parole officers not releasing this man back onto the streets when he is a hardcore, violent career criminal? Maybe that's where the help should come. But no, Mayor Kinney wants help. They need more gun control. Well, gun control failed to keep guns away from this man, but we need more of it. And then the mayor says they don't deserve to be shot at with an unlimited supply of weapons and unlimited supply of bullets. Weren't they shot at by Marcus Hill? I mean, didn't Marcus Hill shoot at them? No, Mayor Kinney says, no, they were shot at with an unlimited supply of weapons and unlimited supply of bullets, as if there's a massive stack of weapons and a massive stack of bullets. Not massive, unlimited. So it consumes the entire earth. It's the weapons and the bullets that are attacking the police officers. No, it was Marcus Hill that was attacking the police officers. Okay, and I'm back. Sorry about that. I was losing my voice during the breaks. I'm screaming at my children to get away from the sharks at the beach here. I don't understand why they allow fishermen to fish for baby sharks right next to where all of our kids are trying to swim in the ocean. I fear that at one time they're going to use one of my kids as bait to try to bait in these bigger sharks. But anyway, I've got my voice back, and we're talking about this horrible shooting in Philadelphia and the failure of gun control laws, the failure of the mayor of Philadelphia to control the streets of Philadelphia to ensure safety for the good people of Philadelphia. It's his failure as the head of the police department in charge with that responsibility, yet he blames gun control. Mayor Kinney talks about how weapons and bullets are just arriving by themselves and automatically throwing themselves at police officers. He fails to mention there was Marcus Hill, the guy shooting the police officers. But nevertheless, that's what we get from gun control. Those are the failed solutions to the problems that our politicians seem invariably to propose. More gun control because they can't control crime. It's a failure of their administration. It's not a failure of us or the American people, and it's certainly not a failure of the Constitution and the Second Amendment. That's about all the time we have today for the Mark Scarinci Show. Thanks for listening to me. I'm broadcasting to you from the beach in Cape May, New Jersey. Have a great weekend.